Most professional athletes that are 6'7" or taller play in the NBA or play another position on the NFL field. But today, we're going to be going over the top 5 tallest quarterbacks in NFL history and how their height really wasn't a good thing for their NFL careers. But before we hop into the content of today's video, if you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and drop a like on the video if you guys do enjoy it. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers, so if you guys are new, be sure to hit that button. And with all that being said, let's hop into the video about the top 5 tallest quarterbacks in NFL history. Coming in at number 5 is Glennon, who stood at 6 foot 7 inches tall and has had one of the better careers for a tall quarterback in NFL history. Glennon was a 3rd round selection, the number 73 overall pick by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the 2013 NFL draft. He came out of NC State with a pretty good amount of potential, and it warranted him to be a 3rd round pick, and he was stepping in to replace a former 1st round pick, Josh Freeman of the Buccaneers. But Glennon's career did not really go as planned. He played 3 years for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and only went 5-13 as a starter until Glennon got a huge contract by the Chicago Bears, paying him a 3-year, $45 million deal, which was seen as a crazy contract at the time. But it is worth noting that as a rookie, Glennon put up pretty good stats. We see many rookies struggle early on and not really have the immediate success as some other quarterbacks, but Glennon actually, despite his win-loss record, had a fairly good rookie season, especially comparing to this last year's rookie quarterback class. Glennon completed 59% of his passes for 2,608 yards, 19 touchdowns to 9 interceptions in only 13 games. Glennon then came back for his sophomore year and again had a fairly okay year, nothing special. He started off 1-4 for the Buccaneers, completing 57% of his passes for 10 touchdowns and 6 interceptions before getting benched by Josh McCown and never really getting another opportunity with the Buccaneers. After receiving a huge contract from the Bears, Glennon had a pretty big expectation to go in and perform well for the Chicago Bears. And he played 4 games, and the Bears at 1-3, they inserted Mitch Trubisky, the number 2 overall pick, in for Glennon, and that was pretty much his stint in Chicago. So a 3-year, $45 million deal amounted to 4 starts for Glennon. But with the Bears season kind of going off the rails early in the year, they wanted to go ahead and get the rookie some experience, and Glennon never played another snap for the Bears. After his time with Chicago, that was pretty much his last chance to really be a starting quarterback in the NFL. He then went to the Cardinals, the Raiders, and the Jaguars, just being a journeyman backup pretty much. In the last 2 years, he's actually played in 9 total games. In 2020, he played down the stretch for the Jaguars when they were pretty much tanking, trying to get the number 1 overall pick. They inserted Glennon, and he had 7 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, went 0-5 as a starter, and that was pretty much it for Glennon's time with Jacksonville. And then the Giants signed him this past year. When Daniel Jones got hurt with a neck injury, Glennon then was inserted into the game. He was 0-4 as a starter, had 4 touchdowns for 10 interceptions, and it was probably his worst season of his career. Now, Glennon is currently a free agent. He only signed a 1-year deal with the Giants, so he was not re-signed and brought back. And I assume he still wants to play, so if a quarterback gets hurt and they need a veteran backup who can bring some stability, I'm sure Glennon may get another opportunity to play somewhere else. But his career has pretty much been a below average backup. He's not the worst option if you have to insert him into a game, but he's definitely not going to be a guy that you want to rely on. And that is pretty much the career of Glennon, who was the 5th tallest quarterback to ever play in the NFL. Coming in at number 4 is no other than Paxton Lynch, who is known as one of the biggest NFL busts in the history of the game. Now, Lynch came out of Memphis as a really good prospect in a pretty weak quarterback class. Lynch's size stood out, and his arm talent really made scouts believe in his ability. And John Elway, the Broncos CEO / kind of general manager, he took a flyer on Paxton Lynch with the number 26 overall pick. And Denver even moved up 5 spots to get the quarterback, as they needed somebody to replace Hall of Famer Peyton Manning, who was fresh off of his last season. So the Broncos were pretty desperate for a quarterback. They had no immediate starter ready to replace Peyton Manning, and they thought that Paxton Lynch would be that guy to step in and be a pretty solid guy down the line. But as we've seen, that really couldn't be further from the truth. It's hard to really know what went wrong with Paxton Lynch because not being in the facility, not really being a part of the organization to watch this guy every day, it's kind of hard to go off of his only 4 starts in the NFL. It was almost like he wasn't good enough to get on the field. But then my curiosity is like, well, we never really saw him in a ton of live action. What if he's kind of like a gamer? What if he just plays a lot better inside of actual games instead of practices? But he never really got that chance in the NFL. As a rookie, he played in 2 games for the Broncos, going 1-1, completing 59% of his passes, scoring 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. He came back 2017, went 0-2 as a starter for 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And after that, he couldn't beat out Brock Osweiler. He couldn't beat out Trevor Siemian. And the Broncos cut ties with him. He bounced around the league a little bit. And the last game that he's ever played in the NFL was a preseason game for the Seattle Seahawks. And Paxton Lynch was actually doing pretty good in the preseason before he suffered a concussion. He was battling out for the number 2 quarterback behind Russell Wilson between him and Geno Smith. And that concussion was pretty much the end for him. He really needed the remaining reps in the preseason to beat out Geno Smith. But that concussion didn't allow him to do so. Geno won the job and Paxton Lynch was let go. Nowadays, you can find Paxton Lynch playing for the USFL. He plays for the Michigan Panthers and has not been too great in the league. From the stats that I have, he's played in 5 games. He started 2 games. He has a 1-1 record. He's completing 60% of his passes for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, with an additional 2 touchdowns on the ground. So he's not dominating the USFL by any means, and I really think that this could be the end of his career in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to get another chance to battle out for even a backup job, but I guess we'll have to wait and see if Paxton Lynch gets another opportunity. And coming in at number 3 is another former Broncos quarterback, Brock Osweiler. Now, the statistics do show that Brock Osweiler is probably the greatest tall quarterback to ever play in the NFL. Although his career was not spectacular, what Osweiler was able to do for some short stretches of his career really might make him the best tall quarterback we've ever seen. He was drafted by the Denver Broncos in the 2nd round of the 2012 NFL Draft and was really drafted to kind of learn under Peyton Manning, get some experience and take over for him once he ended up retiring, while also being an insurance plan just in case Peyton Manning wouldn't return from his neck injury as good as, the Broncos had hoped. Osweiler was coming out of Arizona State, where he put up a pretty good collegiate career. And if you can't tell already, John Elway is a huge fan of these super tall quarterbacks, as he has drafted 2 of the tallest guys to ever play in the league. For the first few years of his career with the Broncos, Osweiler did not start a game. He mostly came in for mop-up duty once Peyton Manning had blown out some teams. But the first year he actually got some real playing time was Peyton Manning's last year in the NFL. He was kind of battling some injuries throughout the season, and he was the Broncos' backup. And he actually performed pretty well. As a starter, he was 5-2, completed 62% of his passes for 1,967 yards, 10 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions, and he actually won some crucial games for the Broncos in prime time. So with his solid 7-game performance, the Houston Texans gave him an absolute bag. They gave him a $72 million contract with $37 million guaranteed in the first 2 years of the deal. But the pattern stays the same as far as tall quarterbacks in the NFL, and it didn't really work out for the Texans and Osweiler in his only year playing for the team. Osweiler did start in 14 games. He had an 8-6 record, which was pretty good, but he only completed 59% of his passes, had 15 touchdowns to 16 interceptions, and after that year, the Texans were done with him. The next offseason, one of the craziest trades in NFL history went down when the Texans unloaded Brock Osweiler to the Cleveland Browns, who practically bought a 2nd-round pick. The Browns had $100 million in cap space, and they basically took on Osweiler's contract for a 2nd-round pick. The Texans were able to get out of the deal, not have to pay him all that money. So the Browns paid the contract. They got a 2nd-round pick in exchange for him, which actually turned out to be Nick Chubb. So in my opinion, that was a pretty good trade for the Browns. Osweiler played in a preseason game for the Browns, but was ultimately cut. So he basically got a free $40 million to play in 14 games for the Texans. And then he found his way back to the Broncos as their backup in 2017. He only started 4 games. He was 0-4 as a starter. And that was really his last opportunity to be a real starter in the NFL. His last season he played was in 2018 for the Miami Dolphins. He stepped in for Ryan Tannehill, who was the quarterback for the Dolphins during that time, who got hurt. And that was the last season that Osweiler has played in the NFL. He had quite the NFL career. He only started 30 games. He made $50 million, and he even won a Super Bowl ring as a backup for the Broncos. I don't think many people can ask for much more than that. Coming in at number 2 is Frank Patrick, who played for the Green Bay Packers in the 1970s. And there's not a ton of information on Frank Patrick because he really didn't have an extensive NFL career, but he is in the record books as the second tallest quarterback to ever play in the NFL. He played college ball at the University of Nebraska and played a couple of positions for them, including quarterback. The Packers actually drafted him as a tight end in the 10th round, but they actually had to use him as a quarterback during the NFL strike in the 1970s. And for his era, if you compare it, he did pretty much what all these other quarterbacks did on the list. He started 4 games for the Packers across a 3-year period, completed 34% of his passes for 107 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. And that was pretty much the entire extent of his career. There's no highlights of Frank Patrick. There's not really any more information about him. The cool thing is he was nicknamed the linebacker that throws passes because there was no quarterback in this era that was that tall. Back in the day when the NFL started, it was not uncommon to see 5'7", 5'6" quarterbacks. So it was really surprising to see somebody as tall as Frank Patrick actually playing the position. And coming in at number 1 as the tallest quarterback to ever play in the NFL, it would be 6'8" Dan McGuire, who was drafted in the 1991 NFL Draft by the Seattle Seahawks with the 16th selection. I think that his career is very similar to Paxton Lynch's. McGuire is also known as a huge first-round bust, mainly because Brett Favre was selected in the same NFL draft in the 2nd round. Brett Favre actually turned out to be the only good quarterback selected in that entire draft class. Another similarity to Paxton Lynch is McGuire could not even get on the field. It was like he was so bad in practice, he was so bad around his organization or something that he couldn't even get on the field. For the team that drafted him, the Seattle Seahawks, he only started 5 games for Seattle, only throwing 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And that limited playing time was all the Seahawks needed to see. They didn't re-sign him, and McGuire went on to play 1 season for the Miami Dolphins as a backup, and he never even started a game. He threw 1 pass for the Dolphins, and that was pretty much the extent of his NFL career. And he's the tallest quarterback to ever play at 6'8". Being a super tall quarterback is not something I recommend, and I don't really know what the actual reason is, but it seems like no matter what era or how many years apart these quarterbacks are drafted, none of the super tall guys ever turn out to be any good. I think if you're a player who's 6'7" or 6'8", you're better off being a defensive lineman or an offensive lineman and taking your bets there instead of trying to be the next tall quarterback. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you guys are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and drop a like on the video if you guys did enjoy it. Let me know what you guys think of the top 5 tallest quarterbacks in NFL history and why you think none of them turn out to be any good. But with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.